Steve here, I'm the Laughing Stoic. Welcome back to the channel. So today I'd like to have a little bit of talk about Stoic virtue. It is kind of the core of the Stoic system, and I think it's worth dwelling a little bit on the four main pillars of Stoic virtue: courage, temperance, justice and wisdom, and see why they might be a good thing particularly, and perhaps where they come from as well in the views of Stoicism over the centuries really. So Stoicism really is based on virtue. It says that if you act virtuously, you'll have a good life and you'll feel satisfied or happy, and you'll be unconcerned about the turn of events, one might say. And that's quite important. But they are quite prescriptive, which is a bit surprising, and let's just go through them one by one. So courage, courage in all things really. Courage is a cardinal Stoic virtue. It really, I think, prepares you for action, for any of the other virtues, for any situation you're in. You need to have a courageous frame, or at least a courageous expectation on yourself in terms of your actions. So why courage? Well, why not cowardice? Cowardice is kind of an alternative, makes you run away. I don't think people who are cowardly feel good about themselves. I guess Gollum might be an example in the Lord of the Rings stories. Ferreting away in the underground caves, looking for bits and pieces, wishing he had some gold and a ring of power. Not a happy character, always looking over his shoulder, always suspicious, always doubting himself, doubting other people's. And courage certainly places you in a position where you're forward-leaning and positive or optimistic in your outlook by its very nature, and it's definitely worth practicing. Marcus Aurelius says, he who has courage despises the future. A very interesting thing to say. Why should he say that? Well, it's another Stoic thing about acting in the present, not being concerned with the outcome so much as your input, evaluating yourself on the basis of your preparedness and actions, and really letting fate take care of the rest. So I think that's worth thinking about. I think it's a great quote. The next virtue to consider would be temperance, and that's another big one. Stoics are famous for temperance. It tends to lead to that lack of emotional reaction to situations, and certainly advises to temper your reactions, to not act on your immediate emotions, which Stoics would call passions, when your actions are directed solely by your emotions and your immediate thoughts. Particularly anger is one that Stoics single out for disfavour in terms of acting. They say things like that the consequences of anger are worse than the causes. And I think that's a fair thing to say and worth bearing in mind. But temperance applies to many more things than just your emotional reactions to the situation. It also applies to how much you take from around you, how much you utilise. So you're temperate in your material acquisitions or uptake. You're temperate in your diet. You don't eat more food than you need to satisfy your hunger. You don't take more clothing than you need to keep you warm and covered. You don't take bigger accommodation than you need to meet your needs and perhaps those of your family. So temperance applies in terms of your material existence. I think temperance also applies in terms of time. I think it's a good thing to be unhurried if you don't need to hurry. Mind you should be hurried if you do need to. So to pace yourself to the situation and to your capacity to respond, and not to act either rashly and impulsively or tardily really, but to time and pace your actions. So temperance is a sort of guiding quality that sort of steers you through the sort of vagaries of everyday life. I'll pick wisdom next and leave justice for the last. So wisdom is probably the most straightforward of the virtues. So it really means learning from your mistakes, and if you're lucky, learning from the mistakes of others. So as you go through the cycle of experience, thinking about what to do, having sort of feelings about a situation, reacting, and then seeing how those actions have consequences in the world. You do get the opportunity to review your actions and similarly view the actions of others. And learning from that, obviously, is the acquisition of wisdom. But it can be acquired, through reading books carefully. Stoic literature would be a start, and listening to people who you trust. There's a lot of situations which you can derive wisdom from, and it's certainly a cardinal virtue. Lastly, justice. Justice is probably the most complicated of the Stoic virtues and is kind of different from Western justice or courts and law as we currently envisage it. So justice in a Stoic sense is probably a little bit more similar to natural law as it might be in the Western sort of heritage, but it goes back further than that and is broader. So the idea of natural law and also Stoic justice is that it arises from human nature. It's in our nature to act justly, and that's being considerate, kind, honest, forthright, and to act in the best interests of others much of the time. So this in Stoicism comes from the idea that people are naturally social animals and that we are bonded to the society in which we live, and that we must act in the interests of that society if we are to be satisfied and if we are to be acting correctly as a human being, and that is simply in our nature to do so. And so people like Marcus Aurelius talked about that anything that's good for the society is good for me, or anything that doesn't harm society cannot harm me. So it's a very, very broad concept. It includes much more than just sort of legal concepts or correctness or rightness, but a positive disposition towards those around us, which we would call our society. So I think that perhaps might be broadened a little bit these days, because I think we have a broader view. We haven't got so much the distinction between human beings and the rest of sort of nature. So if you read the Stoic literature, they kind of talk about people living in cities and they're surrounded by wild animals and ferocious beasts that would hunt them down and kill them, and you have to kind of gather together in order to remain safe. Well, even by Roman times, they had to do sort of expeditions to find wild animals to be scared of and put in the arena. So it wasn't a very dangerous place in Rome as far as wild animals were concerned. But nonetheless, philosophically, this idea persisted that humans were in a dangerous natural environment. And then more recently, of course, we've had the Industrial Revolution and the idea that humans are in dominion over nature and that we can exercise that any way we like and burn as much coal as we like because we're up for that. But really, I think that it is not in our interests to damage the biosphere. And from a Stoic point of view, I think that would come into consideration now, even if you solely took it as the consequences might be damage to human existence on the planet. But we are the guardians, we are the caretakers of life on this planet, because we're aware of life on this planet. So that naturally makes us the caretakers. So I think from a Stoic point of view, justice includes all of these sorts of concepts. And it's well worth dwelling on just what that means, for you as an individual or in your life and how you see the world, because it is definitely a complicated concept. Previously, Stoics, certainly early Stoics, saw this simply as a sort of determination of the gods, that they placed us in the world in this way, and that's where we have to be. But I think even for non-theistic people, the idea that we are part of nature and we are part of life and we can't escape that. We can't just go off into space and live on the moon or live on Mars, even though the novels might illustrate this quite vividly, is worth considering. So I might leave it at that. I think I encourage you to read, say, Marcus Aurelius particularly, or Seneca about the virtues. They're well worth considering because They really are, as I said, the core to Stoic philosophy. That's kind of everything else orients itself around delivering virtuous action, and I think it pays to have a very deep appreciation in your own mind about what that might be. And if you're thinking of taking up Stoicism as philosophy and as a philosophy of life, then you better be prepared to do some virtuous actions. So take care, remember to like and subscribe, and we'll see you again in about a week's time. Cheers.